Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Josh Owen. I'm the Vignelli Distinguished Professor of Design and the Director of the Vignelli Center for Design Studies. Delighted to welcome you to the first lecture of this academic year's Vignelli Design Conversation Series presented by Design Milk and RIT's Magic Center and made possible in part by the generosity of RIT alumnus Chris Bailey and Bailey Brand Consulting. During challenging times, last year's lecture series produced a sequence of bright spots on our collective calendars, and our speakers both illuminated us and inspired us to do better. This year promises more of the same. I invite you all to join our mailing list on the center's website and stay tuned to our social channels for news about the upcoming speakers in this year's exciting series. Rochester Institute of Technology's Vignelli Center for Design Studies is an international hub for education, research, collaboration, and advocacy, which expands the scope of the programs in the College of Art and Design School of Design. The facility houses the archive of renowned designers, Lella and Massimo Vignelli, whose works are icons of international design. The center and archives sit within RIT's College of Art and Design, which was built on the traditional territory of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as Seneca people, the keepers of the Western Door. They are one of the 6 sovereign nations that make up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We honor the land on which RIT was built and recognize the unique relationship that the indigenous stewards have with this land. That relationship is the core of their traditions, cultures, and histories. We recognize the history of genocide, colonization, and assimilation of indigenous people that took place on this land. Mindful of these histories, we work towards understanding, acknowledging, and reconciling. As stewards of history and content, we must acknowledge and seek to learn from our context, bad and good, ugly and beautiful. This applies to the Vignelli Center as with any archive. The Vignellis taught us that design is a systematic framework for solving the world's most intractable problems. In recent times, if recent times have taught us anything, it's that while we as humans are adaptable, our societies and systems have major flaws. We're at a point when we need to have difficult discussions and work to create a new balance in the world. In this, design must play a critical role. As director, I aim to make the Vignelli Center even more accessible and applicable by bringing in stimulating guest contributors from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds who help us to consider design in innovative ways. The Vignelli's design is one philosophy leaves us with a universal message that design is a lens through which we can envision a more inclusive tomorrow. Before introducing tonight's guests, I'd like to take a few moments to set the stage. Out of respect for our presenter, participants will be muted for the duration of the event, but we do encourage you to enter questions you have for our presenter using the Q&A feature both during and after the talk. And we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible during our closing Q&A segment. For tonight's lecture, we welcome Michele Oka Doner, an internationally renowned artist and author with a 5-decade career, a special connection to the Vignellis, which I'm certain she'll share with us during her talk. Oka Doner's work is fueled by a lifelong study and appreciation of the natural world from which she derives her formal vocabulary. The breadth of her artistic production encompasses sculpture, jewelry, public art, functional objects, video, artist books, costume, and set design. She's well known for creating numerous permanent art installations throughout the United States, including Flight at Regan International Airport, Radiant Sight at the Herald Square MTA station in New York City, and the 1.25 mile long bronze and terrazzo concourse, A Walk on the Beach, seen by 40 million travelers each year at Miami International Airport. Oka Doner's work is found in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, Musée des Arts Décoratifs, the Victoria and Albert, the University of Michigan, Yale and Harvard University Museums, and the Detroit Institute of Arts, among others. She's created collections for Steuben Glass, Christofle and Nymphenburg, as well as store design for Tiffany and for Saks. Oka Doner has received numerous awards, including those given by United Nations Society of Writers and Artists, Pratt Institute, New York State Council of Arts, and the Knight Foundation. In 2016, she received an honorary doctorate from the University of Michigan, where she earned her undergraduate and her MFA degrees. Oka Doner is the author or subject of numerous books, including Miami Beach Blueprint of Eden, Intuitive Alphabet, and Everything is Alive, several of which were designed by Massimo Vignelli. So please join me in a big virtual Vignelli Center welcome for a rare treat, the inspiring, passionate, and poetic Michele Oka Doner.
Two of these. Now what? Good evening, and thank you, Josh. That was a very thorough introduction, and I appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm only sorry we can't be in the flesh, but that will come back sooner than later. And I was delighted to learn that you're all on campus. Here in New York, it's in the flesh. Everybody seems back. It's busy. And it's a very exciting beginning of a new year and a school year. I'm particularly excited to be here because before RIT was on the radar screen, I was discussing with Massimo and Leila where they should put their archive. And I had the joyful experience of being at RIT and participating in the celebrations that accompanied the giving the launching of the Distinguished Center for Design Studies. At that time, I was a board member of the Wolfsonian in Miami Beach, and I had attempted to lure Massimo and Leila to Miami to leave their archive there. I thought, since Miami was rebooting as a city, that it would be very exciting for Miami and Massimo and Leila as well. So I told them about Morris Lapidus and the Fontainebleau, and you can imagine how uninterested Massimo was in that. And even the Deco district did not interest him. So the rest is history, as they say. They went to RIT. Though it was a less visible, iconic destination, RIT, and colder, they deserve to receive this exceptional gift from two of what I call the greatest designers of the 20th century, because it provided the qualities that Massimo and Leila admired: education with a respect for history and a deep sense of social responsibility. They felt strongly that only through honing a critical mind over a lifetime can one learn and have the knowledge to work. So let me go first here. Great, thank you. There are my dear friends. So once the decision was made to plant the archive in Rochester, I congratulated them both and told them I believed the future was coming their way. The fast train that was supposed to be built from Washington, D.C. to Boston, which we've all heard about forever, would prove to be too expensive due to the high cost of real estate along the East Coast. Instead, the intelligent plan would shift the rails back to the beginnings of our country's nascent might to empower the old Erie Canal transport network and revitalize the struggling Rust Belt ripe for reinvention. Rochester and the Vignelli Center for Design would become a major destination, I told Massimo, for the new bullet train, which really got him excited. His eyes got big, and it would cut across the diagonal, the state of New York, right from New York. This verbal manifesto was actually prescient because climate change has certainly pressed the pause button on coastal construction. And I think moving inland will definitely be the better option for a warmer and wetter 21st century. Though our paths crossed many times in New York City throughout the 80s, I first got to know Massimo and Leila when we participated in the same lecture series at the Brooklyn Museum in the mid-1990s. After that fertile encounter, our lives literally and figuratively became entwined. There's Leila and myself playing with our necklaces. She gave me a gift, and I don't remember where we were, but we definitely were having a good time. It's a beautiful necklace. I'm sure you all know this fabulous piece, and I think it could also be disconnected and made into a bracelet. I've seen her wear it that way. We were all close friends as well to the indomitable Mildred Constantine, an extraordinary figure who spent years as associate curator for the Department of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art. I was saying earlier to Josh, I'm not positive she was the first woman curator there, but if not, she had to have been because she was hired by the first director. Connie, as she was called, worked there from 1948 to the early 70s and gave Massimo which was described by the New York Times, a quote unquote, a career-defining exhibition at MoMA. Connie not only had intellectual capital, she was a guidepost for those of us who knew her. She exemplified the moral underpinnings of a professional life that have become increasingly difficult to find, but are also ripe for restoration, as I think the pendulum is beginning to come back a little. So students of RIT, this is a project waiting for an aggressively curious mind and would be a brilliant addition to this great archive. There is low-hanging fruit in the life of Mildred Constantine to be harvested. One of the main factors that drew us together, aside from our love of shape and form, was an awareness of time and place. We understood we inhabited the charm moment of post-war release after the dark hours of the last century. Certainly Massimo and Leila were profoundly affected by the challenges that war brings to one's front door. Leila was actually in harm's way and felt the pain of hunger. For many years, our family, there's Massimo at our Thanksgiving table, shared Thanksgiving at our loft in Soho. At one of these dinners, he's scooping the gravy. We were joined by Mickey Wolfson, who had spent more than half his life in Italy and is a student of World War II history, because for those of you who know anything about the Wolfsonian, you know there was a tremendous archive of, till that period. We were basking in the warmth of holiday conviviality and eating the turkey with my wild mushroom strudel when Mickey asked Massimo and Leila about their recollections of the war years. There was actually a long pause. Then Leila began to speak softly and describe the lack of food in her town and how the children would go into the forest to hunt for nuts. There was another moment of silence at the table. Layla brought up a memory of running in the streets with her family from the Nazis. She actually began to cry and said she couldn't believe the meanness of these men who meant to harm them. Massimo was entering his teens during the hardship years. He spoke of architects putting down their pencils and picking up guns. His father died at that time as well, so Massimo went to work at 14, now man of the house, ready to pick up the pencils lying around the emptied offices of design studios in Milan and take full advantage of those large gaps in the workforce. By the time the war was over, Massimo had spent several years gathering skills that would serve him well in the near future. He mentions in an Archive of American Art interview that there were shortages after the war of furniture and every other necessity. He said the whole design phenomena began as a result of World War II. So here we have this wonderful couple, and you see his life as a man began with architecture, providing a living and a structure in a war-torn country, and a fatherless home on top of that. He entered his early years of adulthood with the ambition and a vision to rebuild the world, to make it a better place. And as those of you have heard him on YouTube or have read anything he's written, you know that's exactly what he was able to do. So Mildred Constantine, Connie, Massimo and Layla, and the Oka Doners, though a few years do separate us, are all of a generation that manifested and enjoyed one of the greatest periods of peace and prosperity the world has ever known. So what a fantastic stage set for Massimo and Layla's entrance to the United States, where post-war enthusiasm and optimism began to fuel an unstoppable growth. They came out of a Europe still stumbling to catch a ring on the carousel. Fortunately for this country and for those of us gathered here tonight, they carried with them these lessons of a battered world. I was actually in Italy as a child after the war. It was 1952. And so as a tourist, we stayed in decent hotels and restaurants. You couldn't even find simple necessities such as toilet paper. Now, my mother had been forewarned and we traveled with our own supply. It's hard to imagine the depths of deprivation and devastation that forged Massimo and Layla's mantra: vision, courage, and most of all, determination. Here is the design as doctor metaphor. Massimo and Layla created the notion that design was to be considered a profession, lifting it from the commercial associations that kept it a vocation without need for higher education or a knowledge of history. They strove to elevate. So what did they do? They designed lab coats to wear in the design studio, because that's what professionals in Italy wore. White lab coats to set them apart and align them with professionals in medicine and architecture who were similarly attired. It had a message for the person wearing it and a message for the public. It was speaking to the designer about order and discipline, and it was to the public about professionalism and integrity. Massimo said it was important to give clients what they needed, not what they asked for. Design should be a service to society. I always thought that quote read like a prescription. He was prescribing. He is the doctor of design. So he inflicted these lab coats on his staff when he founded Unimark International in Chicago in 1965. they were Americans and they were not thrilled with lab coats. And the lab coats were gone 3 years later. So here's Massimo. I mean, here's not Massimo. This is Layla and Mickey Wolfson, myself, and I forget, he was a dealer of Indian design. What is this, a Sherwood de Lockwood, the carver that you see the house in New York on 10th Street. And he was the brother-in-law, I think, of Frederick Church, the painter. And there was a lot of Olana conversation going about. By the way, how we got here, this is the Louis Khan in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, the famous Capitol buildings. We got here on the second-class train. You could not be fussy. Even if you had a reservation, it did not mean that when you got to the train station, your berth was there. So we spent, we're smiling, but we spent the overnight. Oh, I did. I was actually guarding Layla. I was terrified if something happened to her on this trip, Massimo would kill me. So, but here we are, and it was really quite an amazing time. So every time I was with Massimo and Layla, here in Italy, everyone has its smock. Designers used to be considered commercial artists. You know, he created, this is something he told me actually on the plane to Miami. And so these are my little notes. And I found them, I had saved them in a folder. And the pencil is the primary tool, we'll get to that. So this ambiguity he also speaks about, but that wasn't what we talked about. I guess he said that was a very European quality, ambiguity, that because of the Pope, he said the Pope tells you and the Catholics tell you this is the rules. So everybody in Italy who wasn't going to go by the rules decided to be a little bit more ambiguous. So he said it was a way of life there. But there's his vision, courage, determination, and wonderful. And this is where he said, stay away from clients' wants and try to satisfy their needs. So, and Layla gave me advice also. They were great mentors. She said, when I was with her at Cranbrook, and I can't remember which project was coming up, and I said to her, what do you charge for the proposal? No, she says, they don't like to pay for the idea. You have to make a prototype and charge them for that. So that's what I did after, that was great advice. And it helped me move forward with several of the clients I had in the design world. So that was what I call Act One, the world that they grew up in, the way the war affected them, and coming to the United States with the European idea of ambiguity, and the lab coat. So then Act Two was what happened when they arrived. You've all heard me mention Massimo quite a bit. Well, 25 years ago, that's the way it was. Mildred Constantine gave him an exhibition at MoMA, not them. And she was very close with Layla. They were confidants. So I went online to verify, and I had never done this before, but I see that it's him, these videos, the YouTube, everything. He's charming, he's articulate, he's fabulous, but it's so is she, right? So Layla told me when we were at Cranbrook for a Knowles symposium, where we were both speakers in the 1990s, that every time they went to a meeting to present, the men would speak to Massimo and they assumed she was there taking notes. So the initial exuberance of a dream of working together, of the two of them, a team, as you saw, there's a wonderful picture you've probably many seen on the bicycle. They're riding off together when they graduate, a bicycle built for two. It was a partnership, it was a marriage, it was for two. But it was slowly dissipated when it was tough on Layla. And she confided in me that it wasn't fair. And ironically, Massimo also, when I met him, said that he was the creative in the team and that she ran the business. So if you continue to reference Massimo online, there's an interview from the mid-'80s, going way back, with Barbara Lee Diamondstein, where Massimo actually answers Layla's questions that she's been in the middle of answering, and nobody blinks. And then she's looking down during the interview, and in the years I've known her or speaking to her, I've never seen her look down. And I think, it sat on my heart because, of course, he was so articulate and so charming, and Barbara Lee just kept talking with him. So Act Two in life and in theater and opera is all about encountering an obstacle that prevents the character from achieving his or her dramatic need. This is known as the complication. The character is disheartened and reaches her lowest point, seemingly furthest from fulfilling the need or objective, but seems to have no way to succeed. So I had begun working with Massimo, and by then they were in their house. And we worked on this book, Natural Seduction. It's my first monograph. It's 2003. And so we started working 2002. And Massimo took the cover from one of my signature pieces, this radiant disc table, which it looks very empty here in the loft, but Thanksgiving dinner took place here. So he knew it very well, and he knew it under his fingers and beneath his wine glass. And the book did really well. This is the Metropolitan Home Design 100, which used to be a big thing. And it says this gorgeous monograph designed by Massimo Vignelli is an homage to the metal magician. That's me. But it's him that gets, of course, the first mention. And there he is at the book signing. This is one of the book signings at, looks like that's Christofle, admiring his work. And here's a drawing he did that with pencil, pencil for him. He started with a pencil, and he never switched to the computer. And he was so facile, and he loved it so much. You could just see how it stimulated his neurology, that eye hand and the movement. And it was just a remarkable thing to watch. I love sitting with him working on the book. So this is going to translate as what he said is, here, this project, Celestial Plaza, that was completed in 1990 here in New York at the old Hayden Planetarium. He would start every book with 3 images, but it would be like The Power of 10, that wonderful Eames film where you start up in the sky and you end up in the head of a daisy. So that on the left is the physics spiral, and the other one I called Genesis. And then he'd get closer. And then here's where he had the type, he started with text. So this is Celestial Plaza. That gives you a little bit of context. And it was put in with the Titus Foundation and the New York State Council for the Arts in perpetuity. But just so you know that in perpetuity is what it is, actually in New Jersey, when the Liberty Science Center was put in, all the school buses went to New Jersey and bypassed the old Hayden Planetarium. So they raised the money for the Rose Planetarium, and you can't unearth a work of art. It's not, correct. So my phone rang and they asked me if they could dig it up and we could reinstall it in front of the new building. So I wasn't going to stand in the way of moving forward if the Hayden descendants also said they understood and wouldn't mind. So it was dug up. Now, here's another book. I mean, we worked on Miami, we put Miami Airport, which was finished a couple years later, but not completely into the book. So it was fun for Massimo, who likes shapes, to go from those shapes to this shape. And these are part of the seeds. They're not celestial, they're not moving quickly, they don't have the same energy, but they have shape and form, and they have movement. And we did a spread of these too, I believe. Now, this is Miami Airport. And here are his drawings for a piece that's on the upper left was coming up, but you can see his drawings for the radiant disc table. These are his layouts. And it was just magic watching him. He really was a magician, and in his hand, the pencil became a wand. So he liked this piece. He's actually used it in his design in his one book. And I could see why. It's simple, it's functional, there's no ornament, there's nothing extraneous. It is just what it is. This actually in life is about 2.5 feet long. If they fall out of these giant royal palms in Miami. And as a child, I used to pick them up, and they used to be full of water after the rain, which was very exciting. You know, you could play with it, you take a bath in it. So for Herald Square project, Massimo designed a gatefold, because this is 160 feet long. This was the drawing, and you couldn't squish it up. So it was very exciting to watch him resolve that design issue. And he included then this as a spread. So again, we're going from the drawing down, we're going to from 3 to 2, and then this was a page. It was really nice to see how he continued that theme of working, moving from the grand, from the cosmos into the granular. So this book was all his idea. He said to me one night at dinner, "Michele, I have an idea for a book, 2 squares. Now, me, there's never been a square that I met or a corner that I liked. You know, I'm organic. I like things round. I like soft Neolithic shapes. You know, if you've ever read my Bible, Lewis Mumford's The City and History, I'm a classic Neolithic. You know, I think Massimo is a classic Paleolithic. And it's all that is only in the first 32 pages. You do not have to read the entire book to get the understanding of what I was what our clashes, what I was up against when I worked with him. So, so this was The Natural Seduction. First of all, back to that for a moment. I should mention the title didn't suit him. Seduction, seduce. Oh my God, seduce. I said, no, this is not sex. It's to seduce is to teach. You love education, I said to him. Duce in Latin, your primal mother tongue, means to develop, to teach, to lead out of ignorance. Okay, so we get past the title. Then there was the grid. The grid, I like full bleeds. You saw all those full bleeds. What a pair we were. We actually fought over 250 pages on a daily basis. He loved it. It was a challenge to his male authority as well as his profession. And I was able to, because I did it, you know, like with feathers instead of swords, he enjoyed the process of giving in to me. So that's when this book, I should say, now he comes, with this idea. He completely took charge. He wanted to do a book 2 squares high. He said he had a dream about the book. Told me to send him images of all the figures I was working on, because those would be 2 squares. And this was a Marlborough Gallery exhibition coming up in 2008. So I did what I was told because he was so gracious with the first book, Natural Seduction. I didn't want to just kind of walk away from our arena. And I returned to his own home office. And then after a week of collaboration, he had a secondary idea. I was to go back to the loft and bring him drawings that related to the figures on the right side of the page. I was going to bring him the left side. Now, I know you've done them, he said. Bring them back tomorrow. I mean, he was right. I had them in journals going back to the 1970s, but he had never seen them, but he had intuited if I was doing this, I must have been doing that. So he really understood my process well enough to imagine and to see through me, which was so joyful. So Layla would watch us laughing. She was full of wonder as we clashed. And afterwards, they cooked or we went out to dinner. So during this publication, Massimo developed throat cancer. And when I went home back to Soho from where they lived on the Upper East Side, I took the 6 and he took the 6 train downtown to Beth Israel at Union Square for treatment. So I figure if I was going for, cancer treatment, I'd take a taxi, there was no Uber. He was the most unspoiled person. No, in fact, if they had dinner here and they left 11 o'clock at night, they went on the subway. They were so frugal is the best word, really frugal. And that also came back to how they dressed, how they put themselves together. So it also, the way downtown, it was quite a ride. I knew he was getting off and was going to be zapped. And, it sat on my heart. He would talk about what was near and dear to him. It always came back to social responsibility, thoughts about keeping your good coat another year, not following trends, the fragility, and he used this word, and stupidity of consumerism. He just never got used to being an American. And his favorite proclamation, which was, only subtraction can make something better. Again, teaching, education, structure. Massimo was very lucky. My mother was a Latin teacher before I was born, so I had a predisposition for the rigor he embodied and the discipline he expected from those with whom he connected. One day, as the train neared Union Square, he said, I suppose good design cannot transform, but can make one's environment better. I think Vignelli design did transform. He must have been very, very tired that day. He survived the cancer, but Layla was ill, and she had been ill a long time. She was ill when I was with her in Cranbrook at the symposium, and she had been ill a long time then. So she was engaged in a very noble struggle for her life. So we reach Act 3 now, resolution. The main tension of this story is the dilemma as two became one. I'm going to address it, and the title of this engagement with us will be Upheld. As they age, the Vignellis had to contend with being together in the apartment, not in the big studio they had on 10th Avenue. So they were with each other more, and neither of them were well. The world was changing around them, and the acceptance of women in the workplace began to grow. Layla was no longer an anomaly. Massimo always had a big heart, and now he acquired the ability to follow his own advice. He grew, he evolved. He was a futurist after all. This changing world was good for him, and he had both the flexibility and the deep love and respect for Layla that resulted in 2 initiatives. he began to include her name and reference her creative abilities on an equal plane. When we had become friends 25 years ago, he told me he was the creative and she ran the business. And the public record bears this out. I've watched several videos, and the transition from just Massimo from the Barbara Lee Diamondstein 1980s, from a singular to double, is very evident. So I was thinking what RIT has received besides an extraordinary tangible archive, books and papers, is in objects, is a human document of a working relationship, which is another bequest, another gift from the Vignellis. It is also a testament to Massimo, as I know he understood and wanted to correct the injustice. Unfortunately, illness overtook this fragile new balance. Layla's years of heavy chemo and drugs that prolonged her life took a toll. When she could no longer take care of herself, Massimo became her protector and caretaker, and he maintained these roles with real devotion despite the demands from his still active professional life. Occasionally, he called me to help out. So one evening, I took the number 6 up to 68th Street, which began to walk to Lexington Avenue to pick up Layla at their apartment on 67th. I would promised I'd come get her and take her around the corner to a restaurant she enjoyed for dinner. As I was about to cross from the north side of the street on 67th, I looked at the south side, and who's on the corner and not in the apartment, but Layla standing by herself. I started yelling, "What are you doing? What are you doing here? What are you doing out?" "Oh, I'm waiting for you." There she is, standing on the street corner. She had slipped out and become increasingly unaware that she needed minding. We never know how long she waited on that corner, but that did turn out to be her last outing. So, heroes must not only learn new skills, but must arrive at a higher sense of who they are and what they are capable of in order to deal with their predicament, which in turn changes who they are. This is referred to as character development. Now, when I was raised, the word character was bandied around the dining room table during discussions, when people came up, or politics, or the president, or we all know that has slipped away in some sense. And once, when I had many interns at one time working on the airport, when I had lunch here at the table, somehow something came up, and I said, "Well, how many of you," I said the word character, and I got blank looks. I said, "Well, how many of you use that word or know what it means?" They all sat and it was blank. So I realized 10 years ago that this was an idea that needed to be revisited. So my friend Massimo's core human value should be noted, along with his transformative skill set that we see in design. What he did for Layla was nothing less than extraordinary. And it surprised me because the world was calling out to him. He was giving talks in Australia and in Edinburgh. He was everywhere. And yet he was there for her. He always exclaimed he was sifting, getting rid of the extraneous, excavating the core of design. But he excavated his own core. And in this activity, I think he found the purity that he had always been looking for. It was so wonderful and moving to see him apply his mission statements to his own life. Ultimately, Rochester Institute of Technology has a jewel. The Vignelli archive spans the history of the 20th century and has opened the door to the future with its far-reaching philosophy. It also has a thing of beauty. Look at the pencil work. This is what he made me go and claim. I had not remembered I had drawn those wooden dolls. I had not remembered I had made these drawings of bones. Look at how he laid this out. Look at the unbearable lightness of being that he was able to pull out. And ironically, these are drawings from the Etruscan Museum in Rome. The grid at the end of that book, I don't mind it. He got me, I pulled him, he pulled me. Look at the grid. And there, you know, he was very touchy-feely, I will say. And so I don't know who caught this picture of him in my studio with his hand on my chest, but certainly it wasn't the first or last time. This was the last time we sat in the office and had tea. And this is Layla and myself in France at the patron of RIT, Lady Hamlin's estate. So RIT has a human document that is a thing of beauty, transcendent, a love story with drama and scope and purpose, especially purpose, because Massimo and Layla wouldn't want it any other way. If their story didn't function in the service of education, it was only ornament. And we all understand what they thought about ornament. So 2 was 1, then 1 was enough. Finale, 2 became 1 again. A real thing of beauty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michele. That was wonderful. Very much appreciate hearing your stories and your incredible, real perspective on the lives of your friends. The Q&A chat room is open, so please, folks who are out there, feel free to add your questions. I'm receiving them via text message here, so bear with me as I roll through some of these, and I will pose them to our esteemed guest. Michele, this is a question I think about your own creative work, and that is coming from, I think, one of our students, which says, how do you think your, excuse me for a second. Sorry, do you have any particular memory or place in nature that has been a significant inspiration in your own work?
I do. That's a very nice question. I have a big banyan tree that's as big as this loft, and it wasn't, I grew up with it. So across the street from where I live, and it's in Natural Seduction, the book. It's in all my books, actually. Everything is alive. And I'm about to become a designated guardian of the banyan by the city of Miami Beach. And I'm going to start for them a natural wonders program. So that I told the mayor last week that I think this huge banyan tree, so we can forest bathe in Miami Beach, should become as relevant as the Fontainebleau. Speaking of the Fontainebleau tonight.
Thank you. Another question that just came in. Could you describe a project or creative endeavor that was incredibly challenging or that failed? And the second part to this question is, how did you deal with that or move on from artistic defeat?
Well, I just finished a 330-foot long glass mosaic wall at Florida International University. That was one of the biggest challenges I ever had. First of all, it was Florida State for the arts money, so it was not a huge budget. And then the president of the university took me by the wrist and led me to their new health center. And so I didn't want to disappoint him, but what I saw was two long walls with overhangs, and then there's palm trees, and then there's a sidewalk, and then there's a street. I mean, so it's a drive-by site. You can't get back. So, oh my gosh, I thought, sure, I'll do it, I said. So I kept referencing the beautiful Brazilian Bacardi building on Biscayne Boulevard, because that's a drive-by site. I never went there. And I thought that became my totem. So what was it about, I analyzed, what was it about that building that held my admiration? And I always looked at it when I was driving on Biscayne Boulevard. Simple design, simple palette. You could get the whole thing going by. You didn't feel why look, it's, I can't grasp it. You could get it. So, but then the money part. I found a place in Boston that represented a place in India. So the way I found is I called Jorge Perez, who was a client of mine, they're related in Miami. And I said to his staff, where did you get the mosaics on your Apogee building? Because I knew that he didn't like to invest a lot of money in these things, quote unquote. So they sent me to these people in Miami who then traced me to Boston. So it was only about the site, the material, everything was difficult. And then the whole thing, it just came out fabulously though. We just did a video and I'm surprised, I'm excited. I never gave up on it, but it was a challenge.
Okay, so persistence is a key to that story, I suppose.
Determination, so, Massimo would say.
Yes.
Yes.
Speaking of Massimo, another question that just came in was, do you think that Massimo's drive to simplify design had any influence in your own more organically styled work?
I've always been a minimalist, interestingly enough. That doesn't mean that the tree doesn't have 10,000 leaves, within that big shape. But I've always dressed simply, and my mother was a minimalist. That my parents ended up moving to Japan for a year in the 60s, and they were so happy with the reduction of stimuli. But our home wasn't cluttered. There were no rugs. It was, one poured Cuban tile floor. They called it Cuban tile, but there was no grid. It was, so I was raised with that as a way of life. So we clicked in many ways. That's immediately we clicked. And we worshiped at the same altar. My mother was European, and I think the idea of waste, the idea of accumulating, not taking care of your coat so you couldn't have it, all these things are very fundamental. And they're lost now. So they're going to come back because I see a new generation. I believe in the new generation. What it takes usually is tragedy to make you think again about what it took. For example, I love this example. The woman who runs the paper mill in New York, Dewey, when we did a master class at Oxford 2 years ago, mentioned, was we were in England, that why were there rag pickers? It was illegal to throw fabric away because her paper was made with fabric, cotton. My early paper was ground up, my old bed sheets. And why is it illegal to do it? Because the energy it took to plant the seed, watch the plant, get the cotton, and then take it to the mill. When you think about what goes into a piece of disposable clothing that we get made in Bangladesh, it's remarkable. It's such a waste. It's so tragic. So, I have one dress I basically wear, and as a uniform, and they had a uniform, so we got along from the beginning.
Great. Another question asks, if you had done more collaborative work with Lela, what kind of work would you have liked to do? Or sorry, what kind of work would you have liked to explore?
That's an interesting question. She wasn't engaged in collaborative work. He was through his books, which is how our relationship became closer in many ways. So her things also had no texture, and my work has a lot of texture, so we agreed on so many things, but that was never a thought to collaborate. I do think because Massimo did the books, it opened him up to a different world. He was a collaborator.
Yeah. Okay. Here's maybe more of a statement than a question, but this one says, I'm a filmmaker, and this speaks to me so deeply. I wanted to express my gratitude and thanks for making this happen. I will take this conversation to my class. Not a question, but something I wanted to share.
Thank you. That makes me feel so happy that I can for a moment carry their legacy, their energy, and their love and share it with an audience tonight.
Another question that's come in. John Dewey wrote that art is an experience and it provides an opportunity for expression in which a dissatisfaction with a situation or an issue must be resolved and the state of the person must be restored. Do you think that perhaps Vignelli's design aimed to do this as well?
Oh, definitely. I think they had a mission. They wasn't like today where how can I get the attention on what I'm doing? As Massimo, I quote him somewhere in my notes, he said, it's not about me. If you look at the Bloomingdale's logo, the American Airlines logo, the New York City map, your first impulse is not to say who designed this. So he was the antithesis of a Philippe Starck light, that was a gun, which I've never cared for. That's an understatement. I think we could do with fewer.
Your art seems attached to and influenced heavily by the physical natural world. During today's climate, we as students are confined so much from being able to travel and explore. Do you have suggestions for how to combat this need to close ourselves off from the world?
I live in New York City, and people used to say, Michele, you're a naturalist. How can you live in New York City? The cities around us, the buildings, everything, we make them out of materials. They're natural constructions. I love the Monumental Impulse. I think it's by Hersey, who taught at Yale. And he said, like termites, like bees making nests, we are designed to create. So I have seen in the streets outside a truck go over. Was it seaweed? Was it grapes? I can't tell, but the branching pattern is there. They're magical patterns, the things that are nature. are everywhere. They're right around your dorm. They're outside. There's no being confined. There's only opening yourself up to your ability to discover your own surroundings. For example, I just walked out from the Javits Center, which is not an energizing place, and we came down. I was painting today, and I heard at a red light, because I was listening, I saw trees, the cicadas singing. And then I had looked up last week, like, why do they like start and stop? I never knew. And this is New York City. They're all over in the trees. So they said that it's because if there was one of them, they were afraid of a predator. But if they all sang together, the predator wouldn't know where to go. So there was safety in numbers. But I can hear them now, but I never thought about them a month ago. So it's a constant opening yourself up and finding the magic in the world around you, and it is there.
I have one more question, and I'll start actually with that, and then there's a comment, and we'll wrap up. The question is from Roger Remington. I just happened to get that particular kind of communication through this channel, not always getting people's names. So Roger asks, and for those of you who don't know, Roger, our esteemed colleague, was the original Vignelli Distinguished Professor and worked very closely with the Vignellis to make the center happen. So our esteemed colleague, Roger Remington, asks, Michele, why is it important that students know about the Vignellis?
These aren't just any students. These are students who are going to solve problems. Massimo says that's what design is about. And we have a lot of problems. So this is in a way, a call to arms, you know. These are the ancestors. There was actually no word for design for many years. I believe it's French, and it comes maybe, 100 years old? It's pretty recent. So if so, these are these are our ancestors, those of us who are making things, and making things that are purposeful, that are useful, and that can change lives. So we need to also remember they came from a broken place, and we need to also remember that for everybody, all humans, our goal is to repair the world.
I think that's a wonderful way to close our conversation. And I'm going to give the last word to a text from our new dean, Todd Jokel, who very kindly says, just a comment. Thank you, Michele, for this touching and inspirational conversation. Just remarkable, and speaks to specific remembrances of how the Vignellis approached life and design and influence on your making, but also about how the general arc of your career has morphed, grown, and evolves to this day. So, Michele, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this remarkable conversation and for the impact that it's had on me and all of our students, faculty, staff, and community here at RIT. And as this is messaged out to the world, how it will change hearts and minds and inform our future. So thanks again.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Josh, it's so nice to see you.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Yes.
I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for this spirited and informative conversation, and invite you all to stay tuned for the next lectures, which are coming up next month and the month after. Join us on our mailing list through the Vignelli Center website. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, be healthy, and have a great night. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Josh. Goodbye.